So now I want to talk about camera settings. So we've learned how to set up lights and add a couple textures to enhance the quality of our surfaces for our materials. And so now I'm going to click on Layout View here. And let's jump into Material View just to make things go a little bit quicker for us. I'm going to select our camera by choosing this dotted outline. You could also choose it here in the outliner. Go down to Camera Settings, and now let's adjust the focal length. So if I was to pull this to the left, you can see I'm essentially getting a wide angle camera lens. So it gives you the corresponding millimeters. If I go in the other direction, let's go to something like 80 millimeters. Type in 80. And you can see we're too close now. It's sort of cropping in, but you know, this might be a more pleasing type of camera focal length for us to use. So I'm going to scroll out a bit and maybe just come down to a lower angle and just reposition this here. And if I click on this plus and drag, I can sort of zoom in slowly. Give it a bit of space on the top and bottom just to center it here. Okay. So that's not a bad composition for an object like this. You could also think about doing a straight on render. Of course, we'd have to modify the position of our background, or a render from the side. And if we jump back to our references, this is the original, this is going to be the render. And so theirs is a wider lens. So ours is an 80 millimeter, and it's really kind of flattening this object out. So if I wanted to try to match this, I could just kind of guess what type of camera lens they have. So if I want to match these up, I could maybe change the position of my camera a bit. And because of the distance in the bottom, I know that I'm not using the same lens here. So let's go ahead and just maybe use let's try a 35 millimeter lens. And let's just jump back into our reference. That looks pretty close. I bet they're using a 35 millimeter lens to shoot this. So it's not going to be pixel perfect, but I can get a pretty close render here. So you can see my background is not facing the right direction. Let's just rotate that. Maybe zoom out a bit so it's actually not getting cropped. Okay, so our render completed, and you can see the background is a little bit dark. So I could try to fix that by adding another light to the scene and illuminating the background. Another thing I can do is actually bring the background closer so that the light is able to get to this background much more easily. So if I go ahead and just go to slot 4 to save that out to a different slot, let's close this here. Okay, let's move the background closer, much closer. So this is more in line with what you would see in a photo studio. They don't have a huge space to work with. Typically they have a room. And so this backdrop would be indeed much closer to the object. Okay, so let's go ahead and go up to our settings. We want to do a quick render here. So let's go to sampling. I'm going to put that at 70, and this should render pretty quickly. Okay, I can see we're still getting a bit of gray. So another thing we can do is to turn up the sunlight a bit. Okay, so it looks like we're really struggling to get rid of that gray in the background. Another thing you can do is to remove the background entirely, not by deleting it, but by making it sort of invisible. If we go into the object properties for this backdrop, so I do have it selected here. It's just called plane in my outliner, so I'm going to call this backdrop just so I can remember it later. If we go down to the visibility option, if it's not open for you, you can just click on it and it will open up these other options. We can click this to shadow catcher. And what that will do is if we turn on another mode, under film, if you go to render properties here, you can see there's a button called transparent. If we turn that on, it will make it so that we can render out nothing in the background, transparent pixels. And if this material is set to be only a shadow catcher, when we go to render, it should render out a transparent background, but also capture these shadows onto the surface. And one of the nice things about doing this is that background being white is also reflecting white light onto our object and helping illuminate it. So we're getting kind of the best of everything, but now we can control what that background is more carefully in a software like Photoshop. Okay, so now that this has finished rendering, I'm going to go to Image, and then we're going to save this to our desktop. So I'm going to click Save As, and let's just go into, I'm going to just save this to the desktop for now, and I will call this chair render 1. And sometimes I do multiple renders as I find things that are wrong with them. So I just iterate the name at the end and it helps me keep things straight. So let's go ahead and save that out. Okay, so I've gone and opened that image up in Photoshop. And so what you can see here is that we have a layer and there's just nothing behind it. So I'm going to create a new layer by clicking on the plus icon. Let's drag that down. I'm going to rename this to BG for background. And I'm going to do Command Delete on the keyboard, and that will paint white into the background. And so now we can kind of see what's happening now with our background. It's sort of this perfect, pure white background. Okay, so let's look at the reference image. And you can see that the color is much brighter and more saturated. So I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer here. And so if we just go to saturation and bump this up a bit, now you can see it's really starting to saturate these colors. So let's just jump back here, back and forth. Okay, maybe a bit more saturated. Not too much. That might be a little bit too much, but we can also try another adjustment layer. That's getting much better, but if we want to maybe try vibrance, that could help. Maybe adjust saturation on here as well. There's more advanced color filters. For instance, curves are going to give you a much more fine-tuned result. But I think for our purposes, we don't have to be exact. This is pretty close. And as long as it's a good render that we're happy with, that's all that matters. So I think I'm going to call this one done. But essentially, this is a really simple compositing workflow that includes adding a background and adjusting the color. Of course, if you want to, you could go ahead and we can add a solid color adjustment layer, and you could add any color you want. Just keep in mind, it's not really going to be realistic because it's not reflecting this blue light onto our object. And so it's really not a part of the scene anymore. It's almost like, you know, if you collaged this onto a colored background, but you are getting the shadows, so it does have a little bit of a relationship to this ground. You could also just add a little bit of color if you want. Something like this, just to pull it off of white, pure white, just a bit. I might do all around a kind of warmer yellowy color, or we can go over here. Yeah. Okay, so it's just barely off white. You can see here in the RGB channels, 255 is the highest, so we're almost at white, but not quite. And so that is good. I'm going to go ahead and save this out, and I'm going to export this as a ping. Call this chair render comp, and save this out to the desktop. And so when you go ahead and submit this, there's going to be a file name that you want to rename that to. Okay, so that's going to be it for lighting, rendering, and setting up materials, and doing a little bit of color grading in Photoshop.